In this tutorial, which is part 11 of our inventory management system, you are going to learn how to now use JWT. In the previous tutorial, if you remember, we were able to set up the brands component, and we were able to have the list of items coming from the API to the UI right here. We can do pagination, we can do filtering, we can do add, delete, and all these CRUD operations. In this tutorial, we are now going to use JWT because if you remember, if I go back to the config, the Axios config, you can see that we used the username and the password, which is the basic HTTP authentication, and we specified the username and the password in a .env file. This is something you should not do. In this tutorial, I'm going to go back to the Spring Boot application and we are going to configure the API to use JWT, Json Web Token. So when you authenticate the first time by providing your username and the password, the system is going to return to you a JWT, a Json Web Token, and that you can then apply to the header of each request to get authenticated, and then you don't have to be sending the username and the password with each request. So let's go ahead to get started right now. If this is your first time joining me, please consider subscribing to my channel. So click on the subscribe button below so you don't miss any updates from me. And also, if this is your first time, please pause this video and review the previous tutorials to know where we actually started from. So let's dive right in. So the first thing I'd like to do is to go to the Spring Boot application, which is this one, the API. Everything works as expected. So we are going to implement JWT, and the easiest way to do it is to follow the procedure I have created on my website. So I have a beautiful step-by-step tutorial, which is very easy to follow to create JWT. So the first thing we want to do is to add the dependency called Spring Boot Starter Auth2 resource server. So we are going to add this dependency. And once we add this dependency, we no longer need the Spring Security dependency. So if I go to the Spring Boot and I open the pom.xml, if I open pom.xml, you see that we have the Spring Security. So we are going to remove this dependency and add the dependency I showed you. So to get the dependency specification, go to MVN repository, and we are going to look for this dependency, and it is this one, Spring Boot Starter Auth2 resource server. And we are going to use the 3.3.2, and I'm going to simply copy it to my clipboard. I'm going to comment out this one, and I'm going to use this one. Okay. So I'm going to just refresh the Maven to re-import. And now the question is, where is Spring Security at this point? Now, if you look at the dependencies coming with the Spring Boot Starter Auth2 resource server, you see that it also includes the Spring Security core, which is actually right here. So it actually includes Spring Security. Everything works as expected. So if I go ahead to restart the application, everything works exactly as expected. Okay, so the next step we are going to follow, I'm going to just go down to part 4, configure the resource server. So what I'm going to do now is to put this guide side by side with the Spring Boot application, so that we can see both of them at the same time. Okay, we are going to go to our security config, and we are going to make this application to be stateless, and we are going to do that by saying just before this place, we are going to say session management, and I'm going to say session creation policy .stateless. Right. Okay, so I was thinking I forgot the. So we are going to first make our application to be stateless. Let's see, session to call it this way. Okay. The next thing we want to do is to now configure the auth 2.0 resource server by saying all auth resource server and auth2. I'm going to collapse this so that we see what is happening. So it's going to be auth2.jwt, and it's going to be customizer with defaults. Okay, so these are the two steps you need to take. Okay, so the next thing we are going to be doing is to create the public and the private key that is going to handle the token. So to do that, I'm going to create these keys. For now, we are going to save it inside a key file, inside a .pem file in the resources directory. So in the resources directory, I'm going to simply create a directory called sats. And later we are going to be talking about how to encrypt our keys. So I'm going to just go to terminal at this, I think, opening terminal right here. So here I'm going to run the commands to create a key pair, the public and the private key. So the first thing I'm going to create using the openxsl command, openxsl, generate RSA, gen RSA, going to output key pair .pem2048. Okay, this is PEM. So the length is 2048 and the name is key pair.pem. From the key pair, we are now going to create our public and the private key. So I think I'll simply hit the enter key. And if we look into the sats folder, we have our key pair. So from this key pair, we are now going to create the public key and as well as the private key. So I'm going to use the command openSSL RSA, and in this case, we are going to be taking the key pair. The in is going to be key pair.pm and the out, pub out dash out public.pem. Let me just cross check. In is key pair.pm, out is the public key is going to be public.pm. Hit the enter key, and now we have the second key, the public.pm. So we are now going to create the private key out of this key pair using this public key as well. The command is a bit long, but I think I'll simply write it out as well because I love writing out commands. So openSSL, I'm going to try to explain as I go. So here we specify that the key format we want to create in this case is PKCS8, TOPK8, top K8, and the inform is going to be PEM. So I forget the name of the full meaning of this abbreviation. I don't remember. So auth form is going to be PEM as well, and I don't want to encrypt, so I have to specify no crypt, and dash in is key pair.pem, and the auth is going to be, we are creating the private, right? So in is key pair.pem and dash out is going to be private.pem. So it's actually openSSL. Let's just correct that. Okay, so let's see if it created a private key. It created it. So at this point, we should be able to just delete the key pair because we have our public and the private key. So I delete the key pair. Okay, so let's do a bit of configuration. We are going to create a new file that will contain the key properties. So I'm going to go to create a new file inside the security direct package. And I'm going to call this file RSA key properties, and I'm going to annotate this file with a configuration properties annotation, configuration properties, and the prefix. The prefix is the name of the properties that we are going to use in the properties file. So the prefix we are going to use is RSA. Okay, and the properties is going to be to have public key and the private key. So it's going to be RSA public key, and it's going to be public key, RSA private key, and it's going to be private key. Why do we have error? Okay, so this is going to be a record type. Okay, so it's going to hold the records, the public and the private keys. And now we are going to create these entries in our application.properties file. So I'm going to go to resources, application.properties, and I'm going to create this RSA.private key. And we are going to specify the class path where we placed these keys, and it's going to be in, I think I should just copy and paste, right? It's going to make it easier, but I think I recommend that if you are a new programmer, always learn how to type out your code. PEM RSA. I think I can just copy and paste and change it. Okay, so I'm going to say RSA. This is going to be public key, and it's going to be public.pem, right? Okay, so the next thing we want to do now is we are going to enable configuration in the base application file, or the base application class, which is in this case is the InventoryMS Spring Boot application. And we are going to add the annotation at enable configuration properties. So I'm going to add at enable configuration properties, and it's going to be RSA key properties dot class. And at this point, we can actually run the application, but then it's going to ask us to create decoders, because for these keys we need an encoder and a decoder. So instead of let me just show you. I'm going to just rerun the application, and it's going to ask us to create encoders and decoders, I think. Let's see, 1 second. So you can see at this point it says define a bin JWT decoder. Okay, so let's go ahead to do that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go to our security configuration, and we are going to create this encoder and decoder. So I'm going to my auth config file. I'm going to close other tabs. I'm going to take this one. No, not auth controller, but auth security config. So the first thing I want to do is to wire in the RSA key properties. So I'm going to just wire in private final RSA key properties, and I'm going to just add a constructor parameter so that it gives us the constructor injection. Okay, so I think I can just create my bin just right here. So I'm going to first create the decoder, because that is the easier one to create. JWT decoder, and we are going to return Nimbus. So we have a decoder class available from the dependency we added from the auth2 resource server. So that with public key, and it's going to be properties of public key and the private build. Okay, so just make sure everything is fine. Okay, so this decoder will be able to decode the public key. So we are going to go ahead to create an encoder bin as well. So I'm going to annotate it at bin annotation, and it's going to be JWT encoder, and it's going to be JWT encoder. And in this case, it's going to be, we'll need to create a JWT encoder, we need a JWK source. And to create a JWK source, we need a JWK. So let's start creating this. So the first thing I would like to do is to create a JWK is equal to new RSA key dot builder. We are going to specify the keys RSA, actually the properties dot public key, okay, and it's going to be the private key, properties of public key, properties dot private key, and it's going to be properties of private key, okay, the private key, and we are going ahead to build. So it's going to be dot build, okay. Okay, so we've created the JWK, and we are going to now create the JWK source. If you want, you can spend some time to read up on this concept, but I think it suffices to simply know how to follow the procedure to create all this. So JWK source, and it's going to need a security context. Okay, let's just make sure everything is fine. So it's going to be JWK source. It's going to be new immutable JWK set, and we are going to need a new JWK set, and it's going to take the JWK we just created. And finally, we are going to create return the encoder and pass it in, and pass I'm passing the source, right? So I'm going to say new Nimbus JWT encoder, and I'm going to give it the source, okay? So now we have our encoder and our decoder, so we can now create a token using this. So to create a token, I would like to have a service I call the token service. So I'm going to create this service called the token service inside the services package. So I'm going to call it token service, and I'm going to also annotate it with a service annotation. And here we are now going to create our token. We are now going to generate our token here. Now, to generate the token, you need a number of things. You need the user information, and you also need the time. You use the current time to determine the expiry of this token. So first, I'm going to get the current time. Instant now is equal to instant.now. And I'm going to retrieve the scope. The scope is simply going to be the authorities of this user, his privileges, the privileges of this user. I want to retrieve it. So it's going to be scope is equal to authentication. So we also need the authentication here. So how do we get the authentication? The authentication will be, oh, what am I doing? So I need the generate token, right? So I need a method public string generate token, and it's going to take authentication. All right, so this is going to be like this. So we are going to use this authentication, and we are going to get the authorities, and we are going to just I'm going to stream it, and I'm going to map, and I'm going to say that collect. What are we getting here is granted authority, get authority, and it's going to be collectors that join in, and I want to join them into a string using empty space, right? Using just a space character. And this is the scope, and this scope we are now going to use it to create the claim set. So I'm going to say JWT claim set. Claim set is equal to JWT claim set.builder, okay? .builder, and we are going to specify a number of parameters. So we need the issuer is going to be self. So this is a self-issued claim set. Issue that is going to be now the current time expires at is going to be now +1, and it's going to be hours, chrono unit hours. So it expires in about 1 hour. So that is fairly okay. And finally, we need to specify the claims is going to be scope. And this is what we already computed. And it's going to be scope. We are now going to build this claim. I always make this mistake. Okay, so finally, we will return the encoder. We now encode return this .jwt. Oh, we need the encoder here. So let me bring in the encoder. So I'm going to say private final JWT encoder, and I need the constructor parameter right here. Okay. We are going to now use this .jwt encoder.encode, and it's going to be JWT parameters.from claim set, and we have to retrieve the token value .get token value right here. Okay, so this is exactly how to generate the token. Now the next thing we want to do is we create the controller methods in the auth controller. However, we already have the controller method, which is the login controller. So when a user logs in, we want to now return a token to this user. Once he logs in using his username and the password, we want to return an encoder. So let's go to look for the method that returns that logs in the user. So it's going to be the controller method called controller, right? Is the auth controller right here. So this auth controller has the /login mapping, And we want to, instead of return an entity and just a string, we want to return the JWT token. I want to generate a JWT token and return it. And to create a JWT token, if you remember, we need authentication. And to create an authentication, we need the user principal. So let's start creating it, and then you see what I mean. So the first thing I'm going to do, let me make some room here. So I'm going to say authentication. So authentication is equal to new username passwords authentication token, right? And it's going to take the user principal, some collection of credentials, and it's going to take the authorities as well. Okay, so we need the user. We don't have it. We are going to create it. Let's go next. And in this case, we have null, and we have user principal. So we have none of this, right? User principal that get authorities. So we need the user. We also need the user principal. Okay, so how do we solve this? To get the user, we have the user available in the user repository. So we can actually create a user using the username coming from here. So let's first create a user. So I'm going to say user is equal to new user. Is equal to new user, or is equal to user service dot get by username, and the username is available in the login request dot get username. So we have the user right here. We now dot get by username, right? Get by username. Okay, we need the user principal because that is what is required by so it requires user, but we need to get the authorities from the principal. So this is fine, user is fine, and we don't have any set of credentials. So to get the authorities, we need to get the user principal. That is what contains the authorities. And how do we get the user principal? I think the user principal, so let's try to create it. User principal, principal is equal to new user principal. New user principal takes user privilege assignment service, right? So we don't have that here. So let's wire in the user privilege assignment service, private final user privilege assignment service, and I add the constructor parameter. And at this point, we can create a user principal using our user privilege assignment service and the user we retrieved, right? So with this user principal now, we can now retrieve the authorities. So I'm going to say user principal I call it principal.get authorities. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have authentication now. We now should be able to create the token. So I can now say string JWT token is equal to token service. Oh, we need to wire in the token service because the token service is what contains the generate token method. So I'm going to say private final token service, and we will add the constructor parameter as well. And here I'm now going to say token service to generate token, and I'm going to give it the authentication. Okay. So now we have the token service generate token. Now instead of returning the response entity.ok and return a string, we can now return the token. So JWT token, right? So I think this solves the problem. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to run this application. When you log in with your username and password, we hope to get the token. So I'm going to rerun this application. At the same time, I'm going to permit me to just maximize this. And I'm also going to open Postman, because with Postman we can now make the request and be able to see the token coming back. Okay, so I'm going to Postman. I'm going to start a new request, HTTP request, going to HTTP localhost, and it's going to be port 8080, and it's going to be /API/v1/login, right? /login, When you specify /login, then you specify the username and the password as the request body. So I'm going to authorization, and I'm going to request body, and here I'm going to say role. We are going to specify the same username and the password. The password is 2424, and so here we have to do a post, and the authorization could be authorization, it could be inherit from parent, but generally it should be no auth, I think, because the login endpoint does not require authentication. So let's send it and see what we have. So I'm going to do a post, and let's see. Okay, so I think everything kind of worked. So we have the JWT generated. So I'm going to copy this JWT. Now we are going to go back to our React application, and instead of using username and the password, we are now going to use JWT, that token we retrieved. So now I'm going to the env, and I'm going to specify this. This time is going to be token is equal to the token we retrieved, equal to the token we retrieved. And I'm going to actually remove the username and password because I really don't like seeing username and password in plain text. Now I'm going to go to the config, this Axios config, and here we are now going to do away with this username and the password. Actually, I'm going to now retrieve the token here. Token is equal to the API underscore token. So here we are now going to say if token, right? If token, and so if token, we are going to add the header, right? So we are going to say it's not config.alt, but it's not config.alt.config.headers. And the header we are going to add is the authorization, and this authorization is going to be, I'm going to enclose in backticks, and it's going to be bearer, and specify the token. So at this point, the authorization should work, and we should be able to access the application just like before. So I'm going to save everything, and let's just refresh the page, and let's see we have our data coming back as before. So let's see if everything works as expected. And okay, so we have our data coming in as before. Everything worked perfectly. We've implemented JWT in Spring Boot, and we've been able to consume this JWT in our React application. So the next question will now be, where do we go from here? We are not going to be copying JWT across every time. I'm sure you know that. So we are going to actually remove this from here. We're going to delete it from here. We don't save this JWT in plain text like this. So we are going to actually, in the next tutorial, we are going to retrieve the JWT when the user logs into the application. So we are going to implement the user login form. If the user enters his username and the password in the form and submits, he gets the JWT. We are going to save that JWT in the local storage or some other place, session cookie or somewhere. And then for each request, we are going to now apply this JWT. I'd like to stop here. I'd like to thank you very much for viewing. Remember to subscribe to my channel if you've not subscribed to my channel. Let me know if you have any challenges whatsoever, and we'll see you in the next part.